What if the biggest Wall Street accounting scandal was never illegal? What if mafia accounting methods became legalized financial fraud? This is not conspiracy. This is how Wall Street cheats legally. Creative accounting tricks once used by the mafia now shake global finance. This is corporate financial manipulation hidden behind legal language. In this corporate crime documentary, we explain financial crime clearly. You'll see hidden accounting schemes used by big banks worldwide. This is the real financial system corruption that no one explains simply. Counting loopholes to legal financial manipulation. The end, and Wall Street will never look the same.
What does a 1930s mob boss and a billionaire Wall Street CEO have in common? It sounds like the beginning of a dark joke, but the truth is far more disturbing. There is an invisible mechanism used by the financial elite for decades that explains why the system always seems rigged against you. And once you understand this mechanism, the way you see money, taxes, and even the word legal will never be the same again. Picture a smoke-filled backroom in Prohibition-era Chicago. Men in fedoras counting cash stained by blood and bootleg alcohol, desperate to make that money look clean enough to spend without attracting government attention. That was the birth of money laundering. Now fast forward to the present. Imagine a glass skyscraper in Manhattan, climate-controlled offices, tailored suits worth thousands of dollars, and the exact same problem, only now with billions at stake. This connection is not a coincidence, it's a direct inheritance. It was the moment the suit shook hands with the machine gun, and instead of recoiling, decided to take notes. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to uncover is the missing link between the criminal underworld and the very top of the global financial system. Decades ago, Wall Street realized something simple and terrifying. You don't need to run from the law if you can hire the people who write it. If you've ever felt that surge of anger when a massive corporation pays $0 in taxes while you struggle to pay your bills, then you've already felt the consequences of this historical merger. This isn't random, it's designed. It's the architecture of corruption operating in silence. The trick that once sent the most dangerous men in America to Alcatraz didn't disappear. It evolved. It was refined, rebranded, and given respectable names. Today, no one calls it hiding the loot. They call it tax optimization, offshore restructuring, or creative accounting. It's taught in elite business schools as best practice, yet its DNA is the same one Al Capone used to build his empire. Billions vanish during financial crises and reappear months later as executive bonuses. Not because the system failed, but because this is exactly what the system was built to do. In this video, you're going to see how the mob model became the gold standard of global business. The difference between a street gang and a multinational bank isn't morality, it's paperwork. As we peel back the layers, the smell of old-school organized crime becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't just history, it's the hidden manual that runs the modern world. And to understand how the mafia's greatest weapon was legalized, we have to go back to the exact moment these two worlds shook hands. To truly understand the weight of that first handshake, we have to look beyond individual scandals and focus on the structure itself. This isn't a story about a few bad actors slipping through the cracks, it's about the system that rewards them. Once you start seeing it this way, something shifts. You realize this isn't distant history or abstract theory. It directly shapes your paycheck, your taxes, and the limits placed on your own financial freedom. And if this realization feels unsettling, that reaction matters. It means you're seeing the pattern instead of the headlines. So let me ask you something, and really think about it. When you look at today's financial world, what part of this magic trick makes you the most angry? Is it corporations paying nothing while everyone else carries the load? Is it executives walking away rich after disasters they caused? Or is it the feeling that the rules were never meant to be fair in the first place? Drop your answer in the comments, not as a slogan, but as a reflection, because the way people respond to this question says more about the system than any statistic ever could. The deeper we go into this history, the clearer it becomes that these two worlds, organized crime and high finance, were never truly separate. They share the same logic: extract as much value as possible, shift the consequences elsewhere, and protect the structure at all costs. What's different today is scale and polish. We're living in a moment where the mask is starting to slip, and to understand where this is all heading, we have to understand where it began. That means stepping away from the glass towers and modern jargon for a moment. To find the origin of the accounting trick that conquered the global economy, we have to go back to a time before offshore accounts and derivatives, back to the era when the solution was crude, physical, and born in the chaos of the underworld. To understand the modern system, we first have to understand the original, laundry. To truly understand this transformation, we have to return to the golden age of American crime, a moment when the underworld was forced to evolve or collapse. In the 1920s and 30s, men like Al Capone weren't just criminals, they were running operations more profitable than most legitimate corporations of their time. Prohibition turned an entire nation into customers overnight, and the outfit delivered at industrial scale. But success created a problem no amount of violence or bribery could solve. And this problem had nothing to do with guns or rivals. It was paperwork. They were drowning in cash. Rooms stacked floor to ceiling with small bills, reeking of smoke and gin. And that excess was dangerous, because money you can't explain is money that puts a target on your back, especially when the IRS comes knocking. And this was only the beginning. That pressure forced a decision that would quietly change the journey of money forever. The solution didn't come from the man holding the gun. It came from the man holding the ledger. Meyer Lansky understood something revolutionary for his time. If a criminal empire wanted to survive long-term, it had to stop behaving like a gang and start operating like a corporation. He looked behind the curtain of the American economy and saw an opportunity hiding in plain sight. The money didn't need to disappear. It needed a story, a believable one. And once that idea clicked, everything changed. This is where the term money laundering stops being a metaphor and becomes painfully literal. Lansky and his associates began buying cash-heavy businesses, especially automatic laundromats. In a world before digital records and credit cards, laundromats were perfect. Hundreds of customers, thousands of coins, no reliable way to prove how many loads were actually washed. So the trick was simple: mix real revenue with illegal profits. $1,000 from laundry, $5,000 from bootlegging, and suddenly the books looked clean. The money didn't just survive scrutiny. It came out the other side as legitimate taxable income. And here's the chilling part: it worked. Better than anyone expected. That success reshaped organized crime from the inside out. This wasn't just a clever loophole. It was financial engineering. The mob wasn't hiding from society anymore. It was integrating into it, filing tax returns, owning storefronts, becoming respectable. This shift from back alleys to accounting offices marked the first step in institutionalizing the illegal. They discovered that if you control the narrative around money, you can control its legality. And the decisions made in those smoke-filled rooms weren't just about avoiding prison. They were about building a permanent system of power. But what happened next is where the story becomes truly uncomfortable. Because the transition from street-level laundromats to the global financial system wasn't an accident. It was an adoption. While the mob was perfecting its methods with washing machines and pizza parlors, powerful figures in high finance were watching closely. They saw the efficiency. They saw how layers of transactions could erase origins. Quietly, the wall between criminal finance and respectable banking began to crack. This wasn't about hiding thousands anymore. It was the realization that the same mechanics could move and obscure billions. The Lansky model wasn't just clever, it was scalable. And this is the part most history books prefer to skip. We like to imagine Wall Street and the mafia as opposites, two separate worlds. But in reality, they're branches of the same tree. The transformation of a mob accounting trick into a legal financial strategy required sophistication only elites could provide. Lawyers, accountants, legislators, entire jurisdictions designed as zones of invisibility, places where transparency simply doesn't apply. Look closely at modern tax shelters, shell companies, and financial collapses, and you'll see the same logic everywhere. Crime didn't disappear, it was rebranded. This is the hidden truth of the modern era. The methods that built criminal empires in the past are the same ones managing global wealth today. The scale changed, the technology evolved, the suits got more expensive, but the engine stayed the same. Every time a corporation moves profits through shell companies in the Caribbean to avoid paying for the roads, schools, and systems it depends on, it's running the Meyer-Lansky playbook. Different language, same game. Comment below. Follow the money. Because from here on, we enter territory where the line between smart business and organized crime almost disappears. And understanding how these two worlds merged will reveal exactly how the most powerful people on Earth play by a completely different set of rules. The transition from smoke-filled backrooms to glass and steel boardrooms wasn't an accident. It was an upgrade. While the mafia was perfecting ways to disguise dirty cash, Wall Street was facing its own version of the same problem. Not illegal gin, but something just as dangerous if exposed. Massive hidden debts, reckless bets, and executive payouts so obscene they would have triggered public outrage. And here's the unsettling truth. The financial elite recognized that the mob had already solved this problem. What the mafia built to survive the streets could be scaled to dominate the global economy. And this realization changed everything. Think of it this way. When Al Capone hid money, he feared the IRS. When Wall Street hid money, it feared public trust. The solution, however, followed the same logic. Instead of laundromats, banks created subsidiaries. Instead of suitcases of cash, they used balance sheets. A concrete example makes this painfully clear. Before the 2008 financial crisis, major banks parked trillions of dollars in so-called off-balance sheet entities. To the public, those debts didn't exist. On paper, everything looked healthy. But behind the scenes, those losses were very real, just hidden. And when the system collapsed, the damage didn't stay hidden. Ordinary people paid the price, while the architects walked away untouched. And this was just the prototype. What happened next was a process of refinement. The raw street cunning of the mafia was cleaned up, renamed, and professionalized. You didn't need a laundromat anymore. You needed an offshore company in the Cayman Islands. You didn't need to bribe a cop. You hired lobbyists to rewrite the rules. Crime didn't disappear. It evolved. And here's where the moral tension hits hard. We're trained to despise the street criminal, but admire the financial engineer. Yet strip away the jargon, and the logic is identical. It's the same shell game, just played with better lighting, nicer offices, and far more zeros. And once this model was adopted, something dangerous became normal. By copying the mafia's system of compartmentalization, Wall Street created a world of black boxes, places where money goes in, gets transformed, and comes out clean, with no clear line of responsibility. Losses are buried, profits are extracted, and when everything implodes, blame evaporates. Executives collect golden parachutes, institutions pay fines that represent a fraction of what they made, and the public is told the problem has been resolved. But this isn't a system failure. This is the system working exactly as designed, and that realization should make you deeply uncomfortable. Because at this stage, the game stopped being about legality and became about perception. If a debt is hidden inside a derivative, does it still exist? If value is inflated through transactions between companies owned by the same group, is that value real? The financial world quietly decided that those questions don't matter, as long as the paperwork looks clean. This was the ultimate inheritance from the mafia mindset. If the process looks legitimate, the money is legitimate. Truth became flexible, reality became negotiable, and legality became a tool for those powerful enough to shape it. This is why the most dangerous decisions in history aren't made with guns. They're made with pens, contracts, and algorithms. The modern economy didn't eliminate organized crime. It absorbed it, scaled it, legalized it. And when you see a massive bank punished with a fine that barely dents its profits, you're not witnessing justice. You're witnessing permission. You're seeing the same logic Al Capone used. operating at a scale he could never have imagined. Write in the comments, money is just a story. Because from here on, we're going to expose how these tactics were written directly into law, transforming what was once criminal behavior into a strategic advantage that every global corporation is expected to master. And when you see how deeply this architecture is embedded in everyday life, you'll realize something disturbing. Corruption didn't invade the system, it became the system. This is where the story enters its most sophisticated and most disturbing phase. Because what began as a crime no longer needed to hide. It evolved into a business strategy, not overnight, but through decades of quiet decisions that slowly erased the line between the underworld and the upper world. This is the birth of the gray zone, a space where laws don't disappear, they simply become unreadable to anyone outside the room. And once you understand this zone, you realize something unsettling. The system didn't fail, it adapted. At first, organized crime had to run from the law, always looking over its shoulder, always exposed. But financial elites discovered something far more powerful. You don't have to evade the law if you're the one shaping it. Through lobbying, political access, and technical complexity, behaviors that once sent mobsters to prison were rebranded as innovative financial solutions. Crime didn't vanish. It was translated into a new language, one spoken fluently only by those who could afford lawyers, accountants, and influence. This is where offshore structures enter the story. And this deserves a pause, because this is a mental chapter on its own. A shell company on paper is almost nothing. No employees, no office, no products. Just a name and a registration number in places like Delaware, the Cayman Islands, or Panama. And yet, that empty entity can legally control more money than entire countries produce in a year. This is the modern evolution of the mafia's laundry. No storefronts, no washing machines, just digital paper trails moving wealth across borders at the speed of light, faster than any regulator can follow. This isn't a loophole, it's intentional design. Let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. If money can move through dozens of invisible companies, across multiple countries, without ever clearly belonging to anyone, who do you think the system was built to protect? The public? Or the people who know exactly how to use this maze? Here's where the emotional weight really hits. When a street criminal steals, we call it theft. When a corporation shifts profits through offshore entities to avoid taxes, we call it fiduciary duty. The mindset is identical, only the vocabulary changed. And every dollar that disappears into the gray zone is a dollar that doesn't build a school, repair a bridge, or fund a hospital. This is corruption without violence. Corruption by complexity. It hides behind contracts, footnotes, and thousands of pages designed to bore the public into silence. The real breakthrough, the genius if you want to call it that, was realizing that the law is not a moral boundary. It's a movable one. With enough power, influence, and patience, crimes can be rewritten as strategies. The system markets itself as neutral, governed by supply and demand. But behind the curtain, it's a carefully managed theater. The same people who profit from the rules are often the ones who helped write them. That's why when these strategies collapse and trigger global crises, the architects are rescued, and the bill is handed to everyone else. At this point, the comparison becomes impossible to ignore. The banker and the mafioso aren't opposites. They're operating from the same playbook at different social levels. One hides in alleys, the other hides in legislation, and the most successful criminals of the modern era are the ones who never have to break a rule because they own them. When you step back, you see the global economy for what it really is. Not just a marketplace, but a legalized infrastructure for moving power upward and concentrating wealth. Every tax you pay, every saving account you check, every crisis you're told was unavoidable. All of it exists inside a system perfected over decades. A system that learned from the underworld and then outgrew it. Write in the comments, the system is the script. Because next we're going to see how this model didn't stop at finance. It became the operating system of the biggest corporations on Earth, turning what was once the mob's way into the default way of doing business in the 21st century. Now we need to confront a truth that's deeply uncomfortable. And that's exactly why it's rarely said out loud. This isn't a malfunction. It isn't a deviation. It isn't a handful of greedy executives breaking an otherwise healthy system. What we're looking at is the engine itself. If tomorrow the world demanded total transparency, no offshore accounts, no shell companies, no creative accounting, the global financial system wouldn't wobble. It would seize up, possibly collapse. That's the hidden truth of our era. The mob model didn't just inspire Wall Street, it became its operating system. Here's the core idea, and let it sink in for a moment. The techniques once used to hide profits from illegal gambling in a single city were scaled up to manage the wealth of entire continents. Same logic, different zeros. This is where we need a brief pause, because this realization changes how everything else makes sense. At the highest levels of finance, risk doesn't work the way we're told it does. For the public, risk means consequence. For the elite, risk is optional. This is the architecture of corruption in its purest form. Profits are private, but losses are socialized. When the mafia ran protection rackets, they guaranteed one thing: they never lost. If a business thrived, they took a cut. If it failed, they took the business. Wall Street perfected this model on a global scale. They take enormous leveraged bets to generate obscene profits and bonuses. If it works, they win. If it explodes, they turn to the public and say the magic words, "Too big to fail." That phrase is the modern version of a threat. It means, save us, or the whole system burns. And every time the public pays. That's the Judas kiss of modern finance, a betrayal so normalized that it's now policy. If this sounds abstract, let's ground it in reality. Think back to 2008. On the surface, it was a housing crisis. Behind the curtain, it was a masterclass in mafia-style accounting. Banks used off-balance sheet vehicles, legalized shell companies to hide trillions in toxic debt. Rating agencies were paid to label financial garbage as safe, the same way a corrupt inspector might be paid to ignore a dangerous building. The mindset was identical. Move the risk, hide the truth, extract the value, and get out before anyone smells the smoke. Here's the sentence that summarizes it all. The collapse wasn't a failure. It was the bill coming due. When the fire finally spread, who suffered? Ordinary people. Lost homes, wiped out savings, a decade of economic stagnation. And the architects? They were rescued, promoted, rewarded. For the made men of finance, it was just business. And this wasn't a one-time event. Wirecard, offshore leaks, endless tax optimization scandals. These aren't exceptions. They're the heartbeat of the system. Crime in this world isn't defined by morality. It's defined by efficiency. If a transaction is complex enough, crosses enough borders, and involves enough legal entities, it becomes untouchable. Complexity becomes camouflage. This is Meyer Lansky's Laundry, upgraded for the digital age. No washing machines, no cash registers, just algorithms, high-frequency trades, and legal fog. The objective is the same as it's always been: disconnect wealth from responsibility and profit from opacity. What makes this system so powerful is that it feeds itself. The people who benefit from these gray zones are the same ones funding political campaigns, influencing regulators, and shaping the laws meant to restrain them. It's a closed loop, a legalized syndicate that regulates itself. And here's the emotional truth at the center of all this. That anger you feel, that sense that something is fundamentally wrong, that's not ignorance, that's recognition. You're seeing the pattern. You're realizing that the so-called smartest people in the room are often just the ones with the most sophisticated laundry service. Comment below. This makes sense to me, because once you see that the line between the boardroom and the back alley has vanished, everything looks different. And that realization brings us to the final question. Not about money, but about our future. About what kind of system this creates, and whether it can ever truly be cleaned. After everything we've uncovered, one conclusion becomes impossible to escape. The line between the street criminal and the elite financier wasn't blurred by accident, it was erased on purpose. We are living inside the ultimate gray zone, a world where the rules are written to be unreadable, and complexity is the weapon of choice. The architecture of corruption is not hidden on the margins of society. It is the foundation beneath it. And once you see that, the story stops being abstract history and starts becoming painfully personal. Because this system doesn't live on spreadsheets alone. It shows up in your rent, in your savings, in the cost of simply existing. When billions vanish into offshore structures, that loss doesn't disappear. It's redistributed downward. Roads crumble, schools decay, healthcare collapses. At the same time, global wealth is parked in empty luxury apartments, used as vaults instead of homes, pushing entire generations out of the cities they grew up in. This is not a side effect. It's the outcome of a mindset that sees society as an asset to be extracted, not a future to be built. Here's the truth most people are never told. Risk was removed from the top and transferred to everyone else. Profits are locked away in black boxes. Losses are pushed into public life. When reckless bets explode, they call it a crisis. When they're rescued, they call it stability. This is the modern Judas kiss. A betrayal so normalized that we're taught to call it economic reality. And if you don't understand this structure, you're not outside the game. You're inside it, paying the price. So let's say it clearly, without euphemisms, without jargon, without fear. The system isn't broken. The system is rigged, by design. That is the manifesto. That is the sentence everything else points toward. The people in power aren't trying to break the system. They're trying to own it. Laws become tools, fines become fees, crime becomes strategy. And the most respected figures of our era are often just the ones who learned how to turn exploitation into a respectable story. This is why scandals repeat. This is why nothing truly changes. Because what you're watching isn't failure. It's maintenance. But here's the shift. Understanding this doesn't make you powerless. It does the opposite. Awareness breaks the spell. When you see the architecture, you stop blaming yourself for outcomes engineered far above your reach. You move from confusion to clarity, from resignation to understanding. Write in the comments, "Told you it was rigged." Because once you understand how deep this goes, the question is no longer if the system works this way, but how long it can survive being seen this clearly. And that takes us to what comes next, the mechanisms that keep this engine alive, even when everyone knows exactly what it is. If you're still here, it's because something clicked, not just intellectually, emotionally. You saw that the world we live in isn't run by what's visible, but by what's hidden behind complexity, silence, and legal language. That awareness alone already puts you in a different position than most people. You're no longer just reacting to the system, you're starting to see it. So let's keep this simple and intentional. I don't want likes, subscriptions, or noise right now. I want one thing: presence. If this journey made sense to you, if at some point you thought, "Now I see it," write this in the comments. The mask is off. That single sentence tells me you walked the entire path, not just the highlights. Because this story doesn't end here. What we uncovered today is only one layer of a much larger machine. There's another piece to this puzzle, another mechanism most people never notice, and it changes how everything fits together. That next video is already waiting for you on the screen. If you're ready to go deeper, don't leave the conversation here. Click the next video. Let's keep pulling the thread.